Hey, I'm Vinny and this is Makeify. So every year for our wedding anniversary, I make my wife a gift. This is our 6th wedding anniversary, the gift is traditionally iron. We both like to ride bicycles, so I got some bike parts. I busted out my torch and I made this guy. This is a design I made for our wedding. It's made out of bike parts and I silver soldered everything together. And I'm going to show you how to silver solder and how I made this in the process. Alright, so there's just a couple items that you need that are, absolutely necessary to silver solder. And then there's some other things that are nice to have, and I'll go over all of those. But the things you absolutely need to have are a heat source. I like MAP gas because it burns nice and hot. At least in the United States, it comes in a yellow canister typically, and you can find this at most hardware stores. You can use propane, it'll come in a blue canister. It's just not as hot as MAP, and so you're usually restricted to smaller pieces, but propane will work. So will a butane torch, but they really don't put out a lot of heat, so you're really limited to very small objects. So because it's hot, and it's just as easy to find as propane, I like to use MAP. You also need a torch to burn that gas. I like this particular torch just because it has a push button start and it also has a control to adjust the flame, which are both very handy features, but really any torch that'll burn MAP or propane is going to work. You also need silver solder itself. 56% silver is what I would recommend, and it comes in various gauges, various size wires, and you just pick the size that is appropriate for the job you're doing. And you need silver solder flux, and this is very important. Don't forget the flux or you're going to have a really hard time. This is Stay Silv. It works well. This tub will last a very long time and it's not too expensive. And lastly, you need some sort of fire brick, or this is a soldering pad, something that'll protect your work surface that is going to resist the heat. This soldering pad is nice because it'll actually reflect the heat back to the piece, so you're wasting less heat. You can heat up the pieces a lot faster, and that's nice and handy. So that's really everything you absolutely need to have. There are some things that are nice to have, including helping hand or third hand, which really these things really come in handy for help holding pieces in place as you solder. A pick is nice for moving things around. This particular pick has a titanium tip, and I recommend getting titanium tools whenever possible for soldering because the titanium's not going to melt or soften or really react with any of the metals as you're heating things up. So a pick. And then some sort of tweezer or forceps also comes in handy. Along with that, various pliers, vice grip type pliers and things like that, just to help hold things in place, are very handy. I find emery cloth or fine grit like wet dry sandpaper to be very handy for removing like rust, because your metal needs to be completely clean, rust free, and emery cloth or sandpaper comes in handy. Along those same lines, the metal needs to be free of oils and grease and anything like that. So some sort of degreaser. I like Simple Green, but really any sort of degreaser will help get your metal clean. So I have links down in the video description to all of these supplies, so you can go check those out and see specifically what I use. All right, so I just got some bike gears. We're going to be silver soldering some gears first, and I cut some of those down into smaller pieces here. And I'm just going to arrange these into a little heart shape. And I cut out a little template that I'm going to use to kind of position these how I want them. So I'm going to use, this is where like little helping hands come in handy, but since these are kind of flat, I'm just going to use another piece of cut gear to kind of help lift these up, kind of just keep things in position. Now I'm going to just take my flux and I'm going to apply flux to the joints, the areas that I'm going to be soldering, and on both pieces. And you want to use plenty of flux. So don't worry about not using enough, or don't worry about using too much. You want a lot of it. Anywhere where you're going to solder. All right, then I'm going to take the solder and I'm going to just cut some pieces that'll kind of the right size, that'll fit in those joints. Oh boy. And now I'm going to just take those pieces of solder and cover them in flux as well. And then just place them right near the joint. Now I'm going to heat the pieces, and you want to heat both pieces that you're soldering together kind of evenly. And you'll see the flux will kind of start to bubble off and dry up. And then when you get it hot enough, the silver solder will suddenly flash. It'll melt and go right into the joint. Okay, now it's important just to let that cool in the air. Don't quench it, don't dunk it in water or do anything like that. Just let it air cool until it's completely cool, and then you can clean it up. So I'm going to go ahead and do these other three joints so you can kind of just see that again. That one actually wasn't very good. I heated the top piece more than the bottom, and so the solder didn't really flow in there, so I'm going to have to redo that one. But I'm going to go ahead and do these other ones first. All right, so this is cooled to the touch, so I can move it. So, turned out pretty well. I mean, I need to clean up this. It's, you know, there's a bunch of residue from the flux and whatnot, but I will show you how to do that in a minute. But the next part of this project is to solder some bike chain. So I cut that chain into some pieces here, and I did that with a chain breaker tool, and I thoroughly cleaned and degreased and dried these pieces. They need to be nice and clean. Now I'm going to arrange them using my template. I'm going to kind of do this piecemeal. I'm going to do part of it and then finish up the loop. I'm going to take my flux and really flux each of these joints that I'm going to be soldering. Try to get the flux down in there. I've pre-cut little pieces of solder here. And I'm going to just apply some flux to those. And place them at the joints. This is where a combination of a forceps and the pick help. Now I'm going to apply heat and heat these one of my solders kind of got out of place, so I'm just gonna fix that. So this is cooled, so I'm going to just continue doing what I was doing. So I've got two curly pieces all soldered up, so they go there, roughly. But they're really ugly from the soldering, and I'm not the greatest at soldering, so these are particularly ugly, but I'm going to clean them up. I'm going to do a preliminary cleanup and then kind of a final cleanup at the end. But for preliminary cleanup, I'm going to use this wire brush thing and clean up all this junk. All right, so I have the pieces cleaned up for the most part. Not perfect yet, but good enough for now. And I'm going to now arrange them and do the final soldering. Okay, now I'm applying heat again, and again trying to heat the parts evenly. The solder is going to flow where the heat goes, so trying to direct the solder into that joint by heating it up, pull it in there. Oh, my piece moved on me. So the piece is cool, and I'm just going to hit it with the wire brush again in some spots just to clean up where I heated it up. But one thing that's also helpful besides the wire brush is to put it in a pickle solution. And I don't do anything real fancy. I just use some plain white vinegar, and I add a teaspoon of salt to every cup of white vinegar. And if you just let it soak in the pickle for a couple minutes, for a little while, it'll help loosen up some of that deposit. So that looks pretty good, but we can do better. So I'm just gonna use a little buffing wheel on my Dremel and some buffing compound, and we're gonna try to shine this up a little more. All right, so it's looking pretty good right now. I could stop here, but I have one other trick up my sleeve. I'm going to use some metal polish. I kind of like this Blue Magic metal polish cream, and it'll make this super shiny. So all you have to do, take a little rag, get a little bit of polish on there, and you just Just rub it in until it turns from blue to black. And then we just take a clean rag, or mostly clean rag, and wipe off the kind of remaining residue. And it's finished. Looks pretty good. So as you saw, silver soldering really isn't that hard to do as long as you have a little bit of knowledge and the right solder, flux, and enough heat. It's a great way of joining small metal pieces together without having to weld them, and you can make some really cool things with it. I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to keep up to date with my newest videos. Thanks for watching. So silver soldering really isn't that hard as long as you have the right equipment, namely the right solder, the right flux, and the enough heat. So as you saw, silver soldering really isn't that difficult as long as you have a little bit of know-how and a couple of the right